Movement is never random in the Middle East. When U.S. forces begin to reposition, when aircraft, warships, and troops quietly shift across deserts and seas, it usually means one thing: something is coming. Not always war, not always peace, but change. And right now, the movement is impossible to ignore. Across the region, American military assets are on the move, not in dramatic convoys broadcast on television, but in calculated, silent steps designed to reshape the balance of power. Fighter jets are being repositioned, naval strike groups are entering critical waters, air defense systems are quietly reinforcing key locations. On the surface, it looks like routine readiness. Beneath that surface, it feels like preparation. The United States does not move forces without purpose. Every deployment is debated, modeled, and stress-tested. When those forces begin shifting simultaneously across air, sea, and land, it signals that decision-makers are preparing for multiple scenarios, some of which they hope will never happen. Start with the air. Advanced fighter jets capable of deep strike missions and electronic warfare are being positioned within striking distance of regional hotspots. These aircraft are not just meant to fly, they are meant to dominate airspace, to blind radar systems, to suppress air defenses, to ensure that if escalation occurs, control of the sky is decided early. Air power sets the tone of modern conflict. Whoever controls the air controls tempo, movement, and survival on the ground. And right now, the United States is quietly making sure it holds that advantage. Then there is the sea. U.S. naval forces are moving through some of the world's most sensitive waterways. Aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, guided missile destroyers, and submarines form a layered presence that can project power far inland. These ships are not symbolic, they are designed for sustained operations, weeks or months of readiness without relying on regional infrastructure. A carrier strike group alone can reshape an entire theater. It brings with it air power, missile defense, intelligence, and command capabilities. Its presence forces adversaries to rethink every plan, because a carrier doesn't just threaten, it watches, it listens, it waits. And that waiting is often the most unsettling part. On land, U.S. bases across the region are adjusting posture. Defensive systems are being strengthened, troop readiness levels are rising, supply chains are being secured. None of this happens without reason. Militaries prepare not just for what they expect, but for what they fear could go wrong. The Middle East is a region where small incidents have historically triggered massive consequences: a single attack, a miscalculation, a provocation. When tensions rise, preparation becomes insurance. But here's what makes this moment different. These movements are happening against a backdrop of strained diplomacy, regional instability, and overlapping rivalries. Multiple actors are watching each other closely. Every deployment is interpreted not just for what it is, but for what it might signal. Is this deterrence? Is it pressure? Or is it preparation for something far more serious? That ambiguity is intentional. The U.S. military doctrine relies heavily on uncertainty. By keeping intentions unclear, it forces adversaries to assume worst-case scenarios. That assumption slows them down. It makes aggression riskier. But it also raises tension, and tension is unpredictable. Inside command centers across the region, analysts are tracking every movement: flight paths, ship locations, radar signatures. No deployment goes unnoticed, and every action invites a reaction. This is where escalation hides, not in declarations, but in patterns. When forces remain in place too long, fatigue sets in. When readiness stays high, nerves tighten. When systems stay armed, accidents become more dangerous. History shows that prolonged military standoffs are often more volatile than sudden crises. And civilians rarely see this part. They don't see the sleepless nights in operations rooms, the contingency plans written and rewritten, the simulations that assume systems fail at the worst possible moment. They only see headlines, if they see anything at all. But markets notice. Energy prices react. Shipping companies adjust routes. Insurance rates climb. Regional governments quietly coordinate, because everyone understands that if a major confrontation breaks out, the impact will be global. The most dangerous assumption is that these deployments are temporary. Sometimes they are. Sometimes forces move, tensions cool, and nothing happens. But sometimes movement becomes momentum, and momentum is hard to stop. What makes this moment critical is not the number of troops or ships alone, it's the context. Multiple flashpoints, low trust, fast decision cycles, high-stakes politics, all of it compressed into a region where history has shown how quickly things can spiral. Right now, U.S. forces are positioned to respond, fast, to deter, to strike if necessary, to protect interests and allies. That flexibility is power. But power carries risk, because the same forces meant to prevent war can also make it easier to start one, intentionally or not. When assets are in place, options feel closer, decisions feel urgent, and urgency is the enemy of restraint. For now, there are no explosions, no official declarations, just movement, quiet, deliberate, and heavy with implication. The Middle East has seen this pattern before. The question is not whether U.S. forces are deployed. The first trigger would not look like war. It never does. It would look like an incident, a drone shot down over contested airspace, a missile test conducted for defensive purposes, a naval patrol getting too close to another vessel in narrow waters. Each side would blame the other, each side would claim restraint, and yet the escalation ladder would already be in motion. In a region saturated with weapons and suspicion, reaction time becomes everything. U.S. forces are designed for speed. Carrier-based aircraft can be airborne within minutes. Surveillance systems track movements in real time. Command centers are linked across continents, feeding decision-makers a constant stream of data. This speed is meant to deter aggression, but it also compresses time for diplomacy. When commanders must decide in minutes, not hours, mistakes become more likely. If a serious incident occurs, the first 24 hours would be critical. Airspace would tighten almost immediately. Military flights would increase. Naval units would spread out defensively, creating layers of protection around high-value assets. Missile defense systems would go to full alert. Cyber units would begin active operations, not to destroy, but to disrupt, confuse, and gain advantage. And none of this would be visible to civilians at first.
What civilians would notice is instability. Energy markets would react instantly. Oil prices would spike, stock markets would drop, insurance companies would reassess risk, shipping through key waterways would slow or divert. The global economy would feel shockwaves long before the first official statement confirmed anything serious had happened. Regionally, pressure would spread. All eyes hosting U.S. forces would face internal strain. Governments would reassure their populations while quietly preparing for the worst. Emergency protocols would activate, borders would tighten, intelligence sharing would intensify. Everyone would be trying to avoid being caught unprepared or being dragged in unwillingly. This is how localized tension becomes regional crisis. For Iran, the challenge would be survival without escalation. Retaliate too strongly and it risks overwhelming response. Respond too weakly and it risks appearing vulnerable. This balance between strength and restraint is one of the hardest calculations in geopolitics, and history shows it is often misjudged. Meanwhile, U.S. commanders would face their own dilemma. Having forces in place creates pressure to use them. Assets deployed for deterrence can quickly become assets expected to act. Political leaders demand options, militaries provide them, and once options exist, they reshape expectations. This is the dangerous middle ground, not peace, not war. If escalation continues, the next phase would be normalization of tension. High alert becomes routine, forces remain forward deployed, incidents increase but stop short of open war. This is where long-term risk grows. Fatigue sets in, systems degrade, human error increases. The longer this phase lasts, the more likely something eventually goes wrong. And when it does, control slips fast. A strike meant as a signal could be misread as an opening move. A defensive interception could be interpreted as aggression. Escalation feeds itself, not because leaders want war, but because stopping feels politically and strategically impossible. At that point, restraint requires courage and trust. Trust is scarce. The global impact would be immediate and severe. Trade routes through the Middle East are arteries of the world economy. Any sustained instability would affect fuel prices, food costs, manufacturing timelines, and financial markets. What starts as a military standoff becomes an economic one, and then a political one. Public opinion would harden, media narratives would polarize, leaders would feel boxed in by their own rhetoric, the room for compromise would shrink with every passing day. And yet, there is still another path. All this movement, all this pressure could achieve its goal without a single shot fired. The presence of overwhelming force could freeze action. Deterrence could hold. Channels of communication, however strained, could prevent miscalculation. Tension could slowly ease, not because issues are resolved, but because escalation proves too costly. This is the fragile hope behind every military deployment, that readiness prevents use. But hope is not strategy, and history does not guarantee restraint. Right now, U.S. forces remain deployed across the Middle East, visible, capable, and prepared. Their presence shapes every calculation in the region. It forces caution, it raises stakes, it keeps everyone guessing. The question is not whether these forces can fight. They can. The real question is whether they can sit, wait, and not fight in an environment where pressure keeps building and time keeps passing. Because the most dangerous moment in any standoff is not the beginning. It's the moment when everyone gets used to it, when tension becomes normal, when vigilance dulls, when one small incident finally slips through the cracks. That is when history changes. And that is why this deployment matters. Not because war is inevitable, but because the cost of getting it wrong is enormous. For now, the forces remain in place, engines ready, systems armed, decisions pending. The Middle East holds its breath, and the world watches, knowing that sometimes the loudest warnings come without sound.